This is Adam Walton on BBC Radio Wales, and I think that record met the approval of our next guest on the programme. What if everything we knew about the world was a lie? Would we be able to perceive the truth if it was shown to us? Ancient civilizations, hyperdimensional realities, DNA changes, Bible conspiracies, which are true and which are deliberate disinformation? Laura Knight-Jadczyk says she has the real answers, and believe me, if you read a book, The Secret History of the World and How to Get Out Alive, you'll know that the truth is far weirder than fiction. And Laura joins us now from our Paris studio. Welcome to the programme, Laura.
Well, hi, thank you for having me.
Now, first and foremost, Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky. I believe you enjoyed that.
I love that song. It's one of my favorites.
Excellent. Well, I think we chose it especially for you, Laura. It's about as creative as we get on this programme sometimes. Now, I felt very, guarded, really, about using the term conspiracy theories. I wasn't really sure how to bracket your book, as it were. Do we need to be able to bracket your book, bracket your writings, be able to fit it into a genre or a pigeonhole?
Well, it's really very difficult. It's difficult for me because, for example, you refer to, say, conspiracy theories, and a theory is something that's based on a certain number of concrete observations or facts. You don't form a theory until you have collected facts and data. And if you'll notice, I've got 15-page bibliography in there, maybe 16-page, that includes the literature that I went through in order to collect the data that is included in the book. The book is heavily footnoted. It does not get into any kind of material that is not fact-based, and it's just the interpretation of those facts that is somewhat different, because you can take the same facts and interpret them any numbers of ways, but generally what happens is people interpret facts and exclude some in favor of others because there are those inconvenient facts, what Charles Fort called the damned data. And the only kind of explanation you can come up with for this world that will make any sense is one that includes all of the damned data.
It's interesting that you should mention Charles Fort. We interviewed someone about him not so long ago on the programme, and of course he was another maverick. I mean, do you if I call you a maverick, is that a difficult or a title that you don't feel fits you particularly well?
Well, maverick is probably pretty good, because I definitely do not go along with the herd, and I don't even go along with the herd of the so-called alternative theorists.
Well, indeed, I've not had an opportunity to read the book myself, and I feel as though, I like to be able to do that, especially in these situations, because I feel as though the easiest thing to do whenever anyone propounds or expounds, theories that go against the grain and go against the norm is almost to pour scorn on them. In a situation like this, Laura, do you feel defensive? Have you gone through a lot of experiences where people aren't actually prepared to listen to what you've got to say and would more rather kind of pour scorn on you before they give you a chance to explain yourself?
Well, as I mentioned, I write some things that are counter to even the alternative theorists of today, so I get scorned by the scientific community to some extent. They have a little more difficulty actually scorning me than the alternative community, because I support what I say with so much data. But the alternative community, of course, it was quite a surprise to be so viciously attacked by those types of people, and also the so-called New Age community. And then, of course, naturally, the religion, the religionists, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, it doesn't matter, because they're all based on one single document, which is the Bible, and I pretty much dissect the Bible in this book and explain things in ways that are more comprehensible, and it's not even a new way of approaching this sort of semi-legendary, semi-mythical material. It's something that Mircea Eliade, a historian of religion, did many years ago, and I quote him extensively, as well as other historians of religion. So so I get attacked by people who are in religions, people in the New Age, people in the scientific community. Although, like I said, the scientific community pretty much leaves me alone.
Well, they appreciate the rigorousness of your work. By the sound
I
of
have a
things.
lot of scientists who are fans. Actually, some of them covertly. They will write fan mail to me, and ask me please not to reveal the fact that they enjoy my book so much.
It's funny, that's a lot of the correspondence I get doing this programme is along similar lines. I wonder why. Now, as far as the book itself is concerned, it is an attempt to, well, not an attempt, it rewrites human history. So it's difficult for me, as the interviewer, really to focus in on any one point where you could perhaps give the people listening an insight into the dramatically different way that you interpret the facts that you mentioned earlier. So is there perhaps a best part of history where we could start?
Well, the fundamental thesis of the book is that our reality is projected or embedded in a higher or hyperdimensional reality, and that what we perceive with our senses, the 3 dimensions of space and 4 dimensions of space and time, are not all there is, and that even when we try to measure things that come from these other realities with our limited 3-dimensional instrumentation, they fall short. You can't even go there. So that's the fundamental thesis. So taking history, taking the data that we have about human history, some of which is extremely mysterious, and some of which it's baffling. Some of it's very shocking. Putting it together, you begin to see a pattern, a flow of something that enters and exits our reality in a way that, if you're familiar with the story Flatland, where the plane being, where the fingertips are put on the plane, and what you see on a plane are round circles. And if the hand were to be put through a membrane, you would just see, circles going through until the hand actually coalesced into a larger object. But to the beings of the membrane, it would never be anything other than a circle that, appeared and disappeared in time. So, our reality is something like that, and that there are denizens of this other reality that are perceivable to some people through history, and down through history they've referred to them as gods or goddesses or forces, beings, whatever, and they ascribe to them powers, appearances, based upon how they read them. I don't think that they necessarily are amorphous either, and that's where the New Age community has completely gone astray, by thinking that anything outside of this reality must be amorphous, must be a spirit. It doesn't have to be a spirit at all. Just a slight shift in the dimensional reality, and you have a completely other reality that is as physical as our own.
Okay, now, Laura, from the point of view of the basic science really behind this, the idea of parallel universe is obviously one that's very common amongst physicists. I believe your husband is a well-renowned physicist as well. So, at least from that particular foundation, there would appear to be great scientific support for your theories. Why is there then resistance from all of the bodies that you mentioned, if this could, if this is almost explainable?
Well, as I said, people who are attached to their religion don't want a rational explanation for what happens. People who are attached to the New Age is really little more than a variation on the old standard religions. I just call it New Age fundamentalism. The scientific support that I get is really kind of unique, because it comes from odd and unusual places. And then there are of course many people in the scientific community who just reject it out of hand. I mean, there's one of my husband's colleagues who jokes that he does world-class mathematics on odd days and channels on even days. So we have an interesting life in that respect. So I think some of the rejection comes from some of the inspiration that I have used to follow these clues.
Okay, well, and obviously people have vested interests, don't they, in preserving their own version of the status quo. Now, you mentioned multiple realities. Why is it important for us as humans to try and question or determine a reality that's beyond our own? In other words, if we can't actually change other realities or change our own reality, Is there any point in making the voyage that you have, as it were?
Well, there's nothing that says that we can't change it if we know about it and understand it. You know, what you don't know can definitely hurt you, especially in this respect. One of the things that really got me going many years ago was that I would read these so-called conspiracy theories, and I would follow each theory as far as I could follow it, following a paper trail. And I always came up against a dead end. I mean, it was like you would take it as far as you could go, and then it was a dead end. It was like, okay, beyond this, there is a mystery. And yet at the same time, you could look at the vast pattern of history, and you could see that, that there was a strong indication that something was maneuvering things toward a particular directed end. And yet there was no possibility in my mind, after following all of these many trails, that this could be a human conspiracy, because human beings simply can't conspire over thousands of years. They can't keep something going that long. They work on immediate reward. They want, cause and effect. I'm going to do something, I want my reward in this lifetime. And so there's just no possibility that any of these conspiracies could be human originated. And that was where I was for a long time. And then I began to think about manipulations from other realities. And then, of course, it was when I got into my channeling experiment, because I was very frustrated at that point, because I could go no further. I mean, I had pretty much exhausted everything. I had exhausted the normal avenues of information, and I had exhausted the so-called, paranormal avenues of information, and I kept coming up against that funny thing that Charles Fort said. He says, "I think we're property," and that struck me. That is exactly how it appears when you look at this vast sweep of history. It's as though we're one big experiment.
Well, and who is perpetrating the experiment?
Who perpetrates it?
Yeah.
Well, I would suggest that it is denizens of this other reality that are referred to by the ancients as gods, and nowadays, of course, they may refer to them as aliens. I don't think they're aliens. I don't think they come from other planets. I think they're hyperdimensional beings, and I think that they've been here for many thousands of years, if not for all of human history. There are records of lights in the sky and strange beings that are similar to, what are called aliens down through history. Jacques Vallée referred to it as a control system, hyperdimensional reality. It's pretty much the same thing.
I'm just wondering why they would appear to be so fascinated with us, especially over such a long, protracted, amount of time. I mean, clearly, I don't know what their intentions are, so it's difficult to try and gauge that, even if they do have intentions like human beings have intentions. But what do you, hypothesize is the reasons that people might want to manipulate us in this way? Or, sorry, beings might want to manipulate us in this way?
Well, the evidence strongly indicates that we are food for them.
And what evidence suggests that?
Well, the evidence of, say, for example, wars and plagues and famines, and and I'm not saying that we're physical food necessarily. I'm saying that, energetic food, emotional, that pain and suffering is something that they feed on, that gives energy to them, just as the movie The Matrix, said that people were in pods and that their emotional energy produced energy for the system, for the machine, that they were batteries. It's very similar, that we are in essence a power supply.
Well, if we, I don't know, the human way of maybe responding to something like that, or maybe analysing it scientifically, typically is to try and look for perhaps an example within our universe. So to look at maybe, a microcosm within, I don't know, the flora or the fauna that we research. And I can't think of anything, and I'm sure you'll correct me, or at least an example within our universe of, an ecosystem that behaves in that way, where, you put things kind of under stress rather than just eating them or devouring them. It seems...
Think of the cat and the mouse. What does the cat do with the mouse?
It plays with the mouse.
Is it necessary for the cat to play with the mouse before it eats it?
No, it's not. That was that's a very, yeah, that's a very obvious example, isn't it? A very good example. So, is the point then that they need to kind of maintain us and keep us here and keep us going as a food source in the same way that we try and sustain our own food sources?
More or less, and I think that in many respects they cut us some slack. You know, they make sure that we know enough to create a civilization, to feed that civilization, to build that civilization up, to increase the numbers of people in that civilization, and then to put people into conflict with one another so that they fight and kill one another, so that there is, you know, massive pain and suffering.
And do you find this, I mean, having come to this conclusion, do you find that, I don't know, a depressing thought, or do you think it's empowering because, you know, it removes us maybe from some of the ways of thinking that humans have had and kind of been stuck to over the millennia? I mean, how do you feel having come to that conclusion?
Well, in the beginning, it was extraordinarily depressing, as you might imagine. And, you know, I mean, it was, somebody asked me, you know, after all these years, what have you learned? And I said, well, I've learned that there's no free lunch in the universe, and if you think there is, then you're lunch. And also, we are not at the top of the food chain. And that was pretty depressing for a period of time. And then I finally began to work my way through that, and to, you know, I went back and started searching the literature for the evidence of anyone who had found their way out of this, you know, had they realized this situation, had they understood it, you know, what clues were there, and what conclusions did they come to, and was anybody able to overcome it, to escape it, so to speak. And clearly there are individuals in history, and you'll notice that the book has a thread all the way through it of alchemy, that I believe that alchemists were among those who were able to not only come to understand the system, but were able to step outside of the system, to be able to access hyperdimensional realities, because all of these things that these special powers that so-called alchemists were able to achieve have to do with mastery of space and time, which is what you achieve when you achieve the ability to step in and out of the hyperdimensional realities. So there are alchemists, there are some types of yogis, there is the ancient material that was brought to the West by Gurdjieff, by Muraviev. There's some very ancient literature that speaks to these matters and talks about people who have escaped, and that's why there's a subtitle to the book, you know, on how to get out alive, because I do address that. You know, I mean, I don't want to tell somebody, you know, hey, you know, you're in one hell of a situation, without telling them that there is a way out. And it isn't, the way out is not in believing your way out, because believing your way out is what they want you to do. As long as they can get you to believe something, as long as they can invoke your faith in some pie-in-the-sky idea that you're going to change your reality by believing it, or you're going to get raptured to heaven when Jesus comes, or when the Mahdi comes, or whatever, you know, that keeps you complacent. Because
but we live, in that case then, we live, at least I would imagine it's the same in the States and in France where you're at the moment, but certainly in this country we seem to be living in an increasingly secular society. We're you know, an increasingly less complacent society, and fewer people subscribe to those points of view. So what is the you know, the belief system that we have at the moment that makes us fodder for these hyperdimensional beings?
I would say that I don't necessarily agree with you. Now, I'm from the United States, and I lived in the Bible Belt. And if you notice, George Bush has a great deal of support among fundamentalist Bible believers who actually believe that if they push the envelope on Armageddon, it will force Jesus to come and rapture them. They really believe this. I don't know if you have anybody in your family who subscribes to these types of beliefs, but I do. And they sincerely, truly believe that. And interestingly, the ideas of the rapture originated in Wales. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. But it was,
no, I didn't know that. No.
Yes, they originated, and they originated in some fundamentalist type churches. that went into some charismatic type activities that were accompanied by strange phenomena, including lights in the skies. At the same time, all over England, there were strange sightings of black cats, black dogs, and other unusual, what you would call hyperdimensional window fallers, creatures that would slip between dimensions. So it was an extremely unusual event that this belief system was introduced there at that time, accompanied by these types of events, which is once again a little bit of evidence of the hyperdimensional manipulation.
Okay, but I would still maintain, I mean, obviously within my experience, yes, there's no one in my family who has those kind of fundamentalist views, but I would suggest that even those, the people who hold those views in the Bible Belt in the States, it's still a minority of the population. I'm just wondering when there's that kind of spiritual void, if it's that kind of thing that these beings feed off and we're becoming more, less complacent, as it were, then we're kind of failing as a food source.
Well, I don't think we're failing.
What will they do about that?
Because it's as much a belief. Science is as much a religion as Christianity is. And you can believe all you want in the power of science, and it's not going to save you if you don't acknowledge that science itself has its limits.
Okay, well, yeah, but there's a rationality to science that, well, at least, I don't have experience of it any other way, that kind of precludes it from forming the kind of conflict that you're talking about, though, that these beings feed off. Maybe I'm focusing too much on this idea that it's the conflict that these beings feed off. If we're becoming, I mean, clearly there's examples in the world at the moment where there appears to be more conflict than there has been before, but we're a more peaceful planet, aren't we, as a whole, than we've been at most points in the past.
Are you living in the same world I'm living in?
No, I'm not, but I'm not living during the Second World War. I'm not living during the First World War. I'm not living during any of the great plagues or the great tribulations that have shaken the human history in the not so distant and the distant past.
But we're sitting here, we've got a lunatic in the White House in the United States, and we're sitting on the verge of global nuclear conflict, and don't ever think that he's not going to try it, because he is.
Yeah, but that's scaremongering, with all due respect.
It's not scaremongering. The man is a psychopath. He will do it. He will do it.
Well, we've
take it to the bank.
I think from a factual point of view, we've been a lot closer to nuclear apocalypse in the past. That doesn't mean to say that we need to be, complacent, to use your own words now. But I think I don't think that it's out of order for me to say that that's scaremongering language.
Well, look at the United States. It has turned into a fascist police state. The UK is practically a fascist police state. I mean, it's everywhere.
I think anyone who lived in Nazi Germany or lived in France under occupation would definitely react against that statement.
I don't think so.
Wouldn't they?
No, I absolutely do not think so. I have studied this extensively. And the comparisons between Nazi Germany and the United States today are vast and numerous.
Do you have a secret police that takes people in the middle of the night and they never reappear?
Apparently they do.
In large numbers?
Well, they're starting to get the numbers larger and larger. They've got a place called Guantanamo. It's just the beginning.
Okay, well that's, it's an interesting way of interpreting things. If we move on, though, and look maybe in the deeper and more distant past, I believe that the roots of your book go way back into ancient civilizations.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously, I'm assuming civilizations where we don't have a great deal of documentary evidence as to how they functioned, and an awful lot of that is conjecture. So what have you interpreted from the ancient civilizations?
Well, the one thing that I looked at particularly was myth, and if myth is a survival of this ancient technology that I theorized to have existed based on certain archaeological finds that I enumerate in the book, it seems to me that, for example, the myth of Perseus. Perseus was given a pair of sandals that helped him to fly, and a helmet that gave him invisibility, and various accoutrements that helped him accomplish his particular mission to cut off the Gorgon's head. Now, a lot of anthropologists say that these kinds of myths developed, as a way to explain the forces of nature. But if you're just explaining the forces of nature, and you have say a super being who can fly, why do you want to put sandals on him to give him that ability to fly? Why can't he fly without sandals? Because there certainly are other mythical beings who are able to fly or to transport themselves hyperdimensionally. They don't need sandals. So essentially what you're looking at is you're looking at a technological object that enables this person to fly. Then of course there are the Vedas, where they have these vimanas, these ships that they would fly in and engage in what seems to be nuclear war. And if you look at these myths, for example, the series of Grail myths, there's a lance, there's a cup, there's a what you call it, a platter, a talking head. There's several elements to the Grail myths, all of which, if you understood them properly, might indicate an ancient technology. And I go into that in the book to some extent to try to show how, if a civilization ended and all of the infrastructure of that civilization was destroyed, essentially, how the survivors would tell the stories about what civilization was like to their children, to their grandchildren, and how after several generations these stories of this ancient culture, this ancient technology would be transformed into myth. And that is what I think we see when we see these ancient myths of flying and special powers and mastery of space and time.
And you mentioned archaeological evidence. What kind of archaeological evidence are we talking about? Because obviously, I'm obviously, I've been to Stonehenge, and just the very fact that we still don't know why these amazing edifices were created thousands of years ago. Of course, there's strong theories, but what would your theories be?
Well, I would say that Stonehenge itself is an energy accumulator, and it probably worked with human beings as part of the machinery. They interacted with the stones to gather the energy or to gather it into themselves. It was a human hyperdimensional interface. One of the ancient legends is that the god Apollo danced at Stonehenge every 19 years. There's an 18.5-year cycle between the Earth, the Moon, and the sun, which is, a three-body system, that every 19 years or 18.5 years it returns to the same position. And at those times, there is a theory that during those times that a gravitational node exists at a certain point between the Earth and the Moon, which could be a doorway to a hyperdimensional access. So if they're talking, if they knew in those ancient times about this particular three-body system cycle, and they talked about the god Apollo dancing at Stonehenge every 19 years or 18.5 years, then they obviously understood something about hyperdimensional realities.
So why have we become ignorant to this knowledge? What has been the force behind that?
Well, many times there have been events that happen on the Earth that wipe civilizations out. I've just finished reading an interesting book by a physicist. His name is Richard Firestone, and he talks about the most recent extremely cataclysmic event, which was about 1,300 or 13,000 years ago, which puts it right at the time of Plato's Atlantis. And he goes through extensive, excruciating detail, and he discovered and analyzed all of the material that shows that the entire planet was bombarded by. He discovered and analyzed all of them of a swarm of cometary bodies that exploded, either in the air or impacted. He proposes that the southern end of Lake Michigan is a cometary impact crater, and that there was one in Hudson Bay, and he has found several others around the planet. And that basically at this point in history, nearly the entire human race was wiped out, as well as all of the megafauna of Europe and North America and South America too.
And the knowledge was lost at that point, and
well,
at points like that in human history.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, and also another thing that happened was that the sea level rose 400 feet, so the evidence for most of our civilization lives on sea coast or on along sides of rivers. So if your sea level has risen 400 feet since then, or at that time, an awful lot would be covered up. And of course, if you have exploding comets in the atmosphere, such as if you have hundreds of thousands of the Tunguska event happening. Now imagine, because you look at the Carolina Bays in the United States, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. And actually, the Carolina Bays are not the only place in the United States where there are these particular features. He shows how they also exist all over the Southwest, that they are also in the in other areas of the world, that there are some of them even in Ireland, I believe. So that this was a massive global event 13,000 years ago that almost literally wiped out the entire human race.
And was that perpetrated by these beings, or was that...
Oh, no, that's a natural cycle. Those are natural cycles. But you see, they know and understand the cycles, and then they do everything they can to keep us from knowing and understanding those cycles.
So it wasn't a question that we got to a point where we almost knew too much and we were being reined back, as it were.
Well, you could say that, because and maybe it's just a natural cycle that when human beings, get to the point where they can destroy themselves, that's just the way it happens. And that may be where we are now.
So, having written the book and having studied these subjects extensively, your worldview does sound bleak, I'm afraid to say, Laura. Is that your feeling? Do you feel as bleak as the very stark manner in which you described the current state of America at this point in time?
Well, personally for myself, I don't feel all that bleak about it. I just do what I can to try to make as many people aware of the possibilities as I can, and if more people become aware, then they can possibly do something to change it. So
is your motivation to get them to change it within the boundaries of the way that our society works at the moment, or in a political fashion, as it were, or is it to embrace this more almost existential way of looking at ourselves and our futures, as it were?
I think the first thing we need is we need to increase scientific study of many things, because science is the only thing that is going to save us. And we need to get politics out of science. That's the first thing. And we need to give them some freedom to work on what really matters and to quit controlling science, politically speaking. And then we need to listen to the consensus of scientists. And I think that's the first thing we need to do. And as far as politics, well, I'm not too sure that anything can be done politically. It's, I'm not really, I couldn't even suggest anything along that line except to get rid of the psychopaths. But, that has to be done through science. I mean, the only way you can deal with politics is through science.
Indeed. And what are you working on at the moment? You mentioned that you just, or at least you're in the process of working on something else at the moment. How do you extend this work further?
Well, I'm kind of zeroing in on one particular aspect of something I mentioned in Secret History, which is the origins of our religious beliefs, which is Judaism, which began with, supposedly with Moses, Abraham, etc. And I am zeroing in on that and bringing together a lot of documentary evidence to explain exactly who, where, when, how, and why it happened.
And if, I don't know whether you're familiar with our bookshops in the United Kingdom, Laura. I mean, if people come into a bookshop, as I mentioned right at the start of our conversation tonight, books like music tend to be grouped under pigeonholes. So where will people be able to find your book in the bookshops, and under what heading does it go? Is that a cause of frustration? From that exhalation of breath, it sounds like it might be.
Yeah, because there's so much science in it, and yet there is a certain amount of paranormal, there's parascience, there is religion, there is alchemy, there is it's just really a no niche book.
It's funny, whenever we talk about science, particularly on this program, increasingly. The scientists that we talk to want us to embrace science, I don't know, maybe more holistically. Look at it not as strict disciplines, to make sure that we're aware that all of these things do join together.
Right.
So we're moving away from, is this a good thing as far as you're concerned, moving away from regarding the sciences as strict disciplines and maybe realising that they interact and intertwine?
One of the big problems that I've seen as I've gone through the scientific literature, and I've been able to consult with scientists directly for some of the material in the book, and to ask questions and to have my questions answered by the experts in the field. And the one thing I've noticed is that there is, scientists in one field don't talk so much to scientists in other fields. For example, lowest on my list, and I really apologize to some of you out there, but kind of lowest on my list are Egyptologists. I'm extremely frustrated with them because, all of our history, our entire history as we understand it and know it as it's promulgated and, popularly, is based on what Egyptologists decide about chronology. And Egyptologists really need to learn some science. It's
a fundamental, it seems like a fundamental mistake. Laura, thank you very much for coming in and talking to us tonight. We've had a few text messages, but one I think does definitely bear reading out. This lady's very brave and I congratulate her. Very strange subject and almost quite scary. So there's definitely support for you out there. Thank you very much for talking to us. And The Secret History of the World and How to Get Out Alive by Laura Knight-Jadczyk is published by Red Pill Press. And you can find that in all good bookshops or go to redpillpress.co.uk. Laura, thank you very much for your time.
And thank you for having me.
Place, the National Library.
In a situation like this, Laura, do you feel defensive? Have you gone through a lot of experiences where people aren't actually prepared to listen to what you've got to say and would more rather kind of pour score on you before they give you a chance to explain yourself?
Well, as I mentioned, I write some things that are counter to even the alternative theorists of today, so I get scorned by the scientific community to some extent. They have a little more difficulty actually scorning me than the alternative community because I support what I say with so much data. But the alternative community, of course, it was quite a surprise to be so viciously attacked by those types of people, and also the so-called New Age community. And then of course, naturally, the religion, the religionists, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, it doesn't matter because they're all based on one single document in favor of others because there are those inconvenient facts, what Charles Fort called the damned data. And the only kind of explanation you can come up with for this world that will make any sense is one that includes all of the damned data.
It's interesting that you should mention Charles Fort. We interviewed someone about him not so long ago on the programme, and of course he was another maverick. I mean, do you if I call you a maverick, is that a difficult or a title that you don't feel fits you particularly well?
Well, maverick is probably pretty good because I definitely do not go along with the herd, and I don't even go along with the herd of these so-called alternative theorists.
Well, indeed, I've not had an opportunity to read the book myself, and I feel as though, I like to be able to do that, especially in these situations, because I feel as though the easiest thing to do whenever anyone propounds or expounds, theories that go against the grain and go against the norm is almost to pour scorn on them.
Which is the Bible, and I pretty much dissect the Bible in this book and explain things in ways that are more comprehensible, and it's not even a new way of approaching this sort of semi-legendary, semi-mythical material. It's something that Mircea Eliade, a historian of religion, did many years ago, and I quote him extensively, as well as other historians of religion. So it's so I get attacked by people who are in religions, people in the New Age, people in the scientific community. Although, like I said, the scientific community pretty much leaves me alone.
Well, they appreciate the rigorousness of your work. By the
I
sound
have
of things.
I have a lot of scientists who are fans. Actually, some of them covertly. They will write fan mail to me, and ask me, please.
This is Adam Walton on BBC Radio Wales, and I think that record met the approval of our next guest on the programme. What if everything we knew about the world was a lie? Would we be able to perceive the truth if it was shown to us? Ancient civilizations, hyperdimensional realities, DNA changes, Bible conspiracies, which are true and which are deliberate disinformation? Laura Knight-Jadczyk says she has the real answers, and believe me, if you read a book, The Secret History of the World and How to Get Out Alive, you'll know that the truth is far weirder than fiction. And Laura joins us now from our Paris studio. Welcome to the programme, Laura.
Oh, well, hi. Thank you for having me.
Now, first and foremost, Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky. I believe you enjoyed that.
I love that song. It's one of my favorites.
Excellent. I think we chose it especially for you, Laura. It's about as creative as we get on this programme sometimes. Now, I felt very, guarded really about using the term conspiracy theories. I wasn't really sure how to bracket your book, as it were. Do we need to be able to bracket your book, bracket your writings, be able to fit it into a genre or a pigeonhole?
Well, it's really very difficult. It's difficult for me because, for example, you refer to, say, conspiracy theories, and a theory is something that's based on a certain number of concrete observations or facts. You don't form a theory until you have collected facts and data. And if you'll notice, I've got 15-page bibliography in there, maybe 16-page, that includes the literature that I went through in order to collect the data that is included in the book. The book is heavily footnoted. It does not get into any kind of material that is not fact-based, and is just the interpretation of those facts that is somewhat different, because you can take the same facts and interpret them any numbers of ways, but generally what happens is people interpret facts and exclude some,